Hi, I'm Matthew Hennessey. I'm the editor of Free Expression at the Wall Street Journal, Wall Street Journal Opinion. And I am here today in my living room with Kyle Smith, the journal's film critic and a columnist for our new daily newsletter called Free Expression, published by the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal. Our readers will be very familiar with you. They've been reading your film reviews and your other reviews and your op-eds for a few years now. They may not know that you had a long career in journalism before that, and they may not know much about you at all, which may be by design. So why don't we start at the very, very beginning, and you tell me where you're from.
Well, I grew up in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, and that was sort of halfway between Red Sox County and Yankees County, so naturally I was an Orioles fan. I always had a strong contrarian urge from the very beginning. And I went off to college at Yale, and I've been doing journalism since 1993. I started at the Associated Press right here in Rockefeller Center, and worked at the New York Post for a few years, People magazine. Went back to the New York Post to be a film critic in 2005. And I worked at National Review for 5 years, and I started here 3 years ago as the film critic, but now, as you have given me the opportunity, I'm going to write about a wider variety of topics.
How is it that you managed to become a Baltimore Orioles fan in Western Massachusetts in the 70s and 80s?
So when I was growing up, you're either a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan. I thought there has to be a third way so I could annoy everyone. And that was the Earl Weaver Orioles teams in the 70s, 1976, 77, known for being kind of scrappy underdogs. They had Reggie Jackson for 1 year, 1976. Lost him to a much bigger club the following year. But I always liked that they were the fighters. I was sort of like the little fighter in my family. I had a much bigger brother, like he was literally twice my size at one point. And I was constantly fighting with him, but that taught me a sort of fighting spirit that I think I still have.
How did you get into the movies? As a young guy, were you into the movies? Were you seeing a lot of movies during this era in the 70s?
Yes. In fact, I begged my parents for a VCR when I was about 14 or 15. Very few people had them in the early 80s. You recall, people started to get them in like maybe 83, 84. I got one in 82, which entailed saving up all my money for like 2 years. At one point I invited all my friends over to watch Star Wars when it came out, which cost $5 to rent, which would be like, what, $30 today? And so I charged all my friends 75 cents so they could come over and see Star Wars on videotape. And that was one of many instances where I was just absolutely blown away by the power of these movies on videotape. And also HBO, which was showing uncut movies. We had just gotten that around the same time.
Was Star Wars the catalyst for you, as it was for a lot of young guys in that era?
I think it was in a way, because when I was really young, it seemed to me that all the movies that my dad, we had this thing called Picture for a Sunday afternoon, and my dad would kind of watch it all day Sunday and fall asleep, but none of these are movies I was interested in. They're all like Audie Murphy war movies, follow me, Sarge, I'm gonna go, that kind of thing. Or there were Westerns, which I thought were boring, or there were Elvis Presley movies, which I thought were super boring. It wasn't until I think Star Wars came along that I started to see how movies could be like funny and exciting and fast moving all at the same time. Like those earlier movies were probably from the 50s, and they're way too slow moving for a little kid to appreciate.
So you were drawn to the stories more than the performances or the spectacle of it. You were, from the very beginning, interested in the plots of these movies?
Star Wars I was, yes. The other movies, if you recall, like, for a little kid, like a John Ford Western or a John Wayne movie, they're kind of too slow and pokey, like long, stagey scenes. And I think the George Lucas, Steven Spielberg revolution was, we can really pick up the pace. Like when they were shooting Star Wars, the actors all say the only direction Lucas gave us was faster, faster. So it was way more in touch with what a little kid was looking for. Like a movie that would like go from one, shootout action scene to another with very little downtime in between and a lot of quips and jokes. And it was just faster and funnier than any other kind of grown-up movie I'd seen, although you could argue it's not really a grown-up movie.
Now, how did you get to Yale? Was that a big leap in your family for a guy like you to end up at an Ivy League school?
Definitely.
And what was your experience like there?
Definitely was different for my family. No one in my family had gone to college before. Being slightly overconfident about getting into Amherst, I kind of at the last minute had to cobble together some applications, and I applied to Boston College, Vassar, Wesleyan, all of them like within 2 or 3 hours of my house. And Yale was kind of the long shot, but it was easier to get in than it is now.
You were in the ROTC at Yale.
I was. ROTC at the time was not allowed on campus, so you had to go to Bridgeport to take it, but that's what paid for my college. Yeah.
What was college, Kyle, like?
Well, I was an English major, and I was pretty confident that I could be a writer, but I didn't know exactly how you'd make a living off that. So I sort of pictured maybe being a novelist or maybe being a professor. But the one thing I really knew is that I didn't want them to mess up my writing style, so I didn't take any writing classes. Instead, I wrote my own thing. I had this little newsletter that I wrote every week for my residential college, where I took like news items like, there's a meeting there's a tea with the master in the common room at Wednesday at 4. So I take all these like little news items and kind of make it into a ridiculous humor column that had, information just incidentally in it. So that was the thing I was most interested in Yale, was my own little project.
So you considered yourself a writer even at that young age?
I always knew I could write. Ever since my first 3rd grade bestseller, the 4-page masterpiece, Which is which was written in crayon on construction paper, I always knew I could write.
And you always wanted to write?
I always wanted to write, but I never knew anyone who was a writer. I didn't know how you'd go about making a living as a writer. But when I moved to New York, when I got out of the Army, I thought, who will pay me to write? So I didn't care what I was writing about, just so long as I could find someone who could pay me to write. So I applied for newspaper jobs in the Associated Press, and the AP hired me. And I got enough clips out of AP so that the New York Post hired me.
And how long were you in the Army?
2 years. I was in Germany, in Würzburg, 3rd Infantry Division. So an army's kind of like a snake. There's a deadly head and then a long trail behind it. That's part of the long trail that was in Saudi Arabia. Only, I think, 4 soldiers from our company wound up going forward into Iraq. But we were in personnel processing, like we're called a personnel service company, so we were basically in charge of the record keeping and stuff. So we weren't exactly mission essential when it comes to invading. So
you get out of the Army, you land in New York, you start pounding the pavement looking for writing jobs, you get a little bit of success, and what kind of things were you doing in those early days?
When I first moved to New York, there were about 2,000 murders a year, so that's about 6 a day. Most murders aren't interesting to newspaper editors. Probably 5 out of 6 are not interesting because they're in the game, as it were. Criminals killing each other. But 1 out of 6, there'd be an innocent person getting murdered, and I wound up covering a lot of murders, and it was super depressing. And what I really wanted to do was write about, the finer side of life, the arts. Eventually, I started writing kind of humor pieces that were about like David Letterman or whatever, and I had enough of those after 3 years, so that I could present myself at People magazine as an entertainment writer, which is what I did over there for 8 years. The best thing I got to do at People was I spent an hour with Tom Wolfe just for a one-on-one interview when I Am Charlotte Simmons came out, I think. And that was, he's my idol. He's everyone's idol, right? He's probably your idol. One of the great journalists.
You're my idol.
The thing that really made me want to be a journalist was when I was in college and someone gave me a stack of books from a semester of creative writing or something. One of the books was The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, and I had no interest whatsoever in the space program, but I picked this book up and I thought, holy cow, this is great writing all the way through. This is what a writer should be. You should just punch it through to the max. It should be funny, fast, entertaining. It should be colorful. It should be rich with detail. And of course, that book has a very underlying, very patriotic foundation. And I think that was sort of the foundation of me becoming a conservative, because whoever thought these guys were such great heroes? I kind of grew up in the 70s when everyone was everything was a joke. Nixon was a joke, war, nobody was pro-war. Vietnam was a big disaster. But in the 80s, patriotism, love of country started to come back, and that was sort of my gateway drug to that.
How did you end up at the New York Post, and what did you focus on writing there?
When I worked at Associated Press, they had these weird union rules, so they hired me to be what they called a news clerk, where you would essentially learn the trade. You were kind of serving the reporters, like I'd literally deliver the mail and things like that. And one of the activities I had was printing up the stories from the previous day and stapling them to a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper and putting them in these cubbies. The cubbies were 1 to 31, so people could look up like what happened on the 11th day of the last month in a cubbyhole. This is, of course, pre-internet. So every once in a while, they would send me out to cover a fire. I think the first tree I covered was the Christmas tree lighting downstairs in Rockefeller Plaza. The AP used to be right there on Rockefeller Plaza, right across from the Christmas tree lighting. Things like that, I gradually learned how to do journalism, even though I hadn't worked for the college paper and didn't really know anything about it. But I sort of gradually, stealthily, by hanging around with reporters, learning the lingo, learning what a lead was, learning what a flack was. That 9 months was my journalism school, except, they paid me instead of me paying them. And after when you write for AP, you never really know if anyone's going to use your material because it goes out on the wire. But occasionally somebody would print my story in like the Trenton Times or whatever, so I would get enough clips that I could present myself to the New York Post. And they hired me as a GA, General Assignment Reporter, which meant going out to cover murders a lot of the time. Or it might be something frivolous, or you might be stalking a celebrity. Like we spent one day waiting for Woody Allen to come back to his apartment, and he never did, because we were trying to get a quote from him about whatever was going on there.
And the plan was just to ambush him as he goes to put his key in the door?
Yeah, well, he has a doorman. But yeah,
Okay.
we just waited in the car, me and the photographer, you're kind of stalking him. It's kind of like being a secret agent. Like, you don't want to reveal you're a reporter, you're in an unmarked car, but
Right.
the hope is that you jump out of the bushes and say, Mr. Allen, Mia said this about you, what's your response? And maybe you'll get a response or maybe you won't.
But eventually you became a columnist and you started writing about the arts, as you said.
Many years later, when I was working at People magazine, we had a book review editor who was kind of always, we published a lot of book reviews every week, and they're 150, 300 words. And I said, well, I could write a book review. Could I write a book review for you? And she was like, oh, sure. I was in the office next to her. It was just pure proximity. And writing book reviews was how I became a critic, just on the side. When you work at People, you mainly do celebrity profiles or little guy who made good stories, things like that. But on the side, I gradually wrote enough book reviews that after a while they hired me to be the book review editor at People, which I was for about 4.5 years, I think. And in the bargain, I was also the music review editor, so I assigned myself a bunch of music reviews. And when I heard that the New York Post was looking for a film critic, I sort of presented a package of my book and music reviews to the editor, who I'd known before from working at the Post. I said, hey, I could be your movie critic. What about it? And she basically said, sure. That was Faye Pan. She was a good mentor to me, and that was back in 2005.
The image in many people's minds of daily life at a tabloid newspaper like the New York Post is true or not true in your experience? Chaotic and people shouting and phones ringing and puffs of smoke.
It was like that before the internet. There was a lot of shouting. A newsroom was a very noisy place. I think probably to this day, you still have editors yelling out copy, and a copy kid would scurry over and pick up a piece of paper and bring it to the other side of the room. Now newsrooms, as you know, are pretty quiet. I think most inquiries go out by email. People aren't talking on the phone that much. Here at the Journal, we have little pods where people go if they want to make a phone call because you don't want to disturb anybody. So it is a little bit like a library in a newsroom now. But yeah, back in the early mid-'90s, it was absolutely a noisy, chaotic place. We always had TVs going. There was a wall of TVs, so you could, in case there's breaking news, you could pick up on what the others were doing. People were shouting across the room. People were cracking jokes. We had this sort of running gag that our biggest advertiser was an electronics chain called Nobody Beats the Whiz, and they'd buy like 6 pages of ads in the paper every day. And every once in a while, somebody would yell out, "Hey, Mike, what? Breaking news, what? Somebody beat the Whiz." That kind of thing. It was a very slangy, fun place. And if you see the Ron Howard movie, The Paper, that's 90% accurate. That was written by a guy who worked at the Daily News at the time.
Now you spend most of your time in screening rooms, I would imagine. People will be interested to know, when you get the chance to review a movie, do they send it to you or do you have to go and watch it?
Good question. There used to be 3 screening rooms that were kind of rented out to whoever wanted them in Midtown Manhattan. All 3 of those are now gone. There are still a few screening rooms left in Manhattan, and each movie studio has its own screening room. But of course, the vast majority of movies are independent movies. They're not made by the studios. Usually, if Disney has a movie, they're a blockbuster, and they want you to see it with an audience. So they'll say, be at the AMC on 42nd Street, Monday at 7 o'clock, with an audience. They paper the house with people. They gave away tickets through a radio station or something. The hope is that you, grumpy critic, probably middle-aged, will be excited by the audience reaction as they're cheering on Captain Marvel or whatever, and you will be affected by that. So they want you to see it with a crowd if it's a crowd-type movie. If it's a little drama or weird little indie, you'd see it probably in a screening room, or probably half the time they'll just send you a link so you can watch it on your laptop.
When you see a movie in a screening, what do? You just go home, open up your computer, and just tap out a review, or do you like to sleep on it? How long does it take you to produce it? What's the process?
To me, the sooner you write it after the movie, the better off you're going to be, the fresher it will be in your mind. But very often you can't do that because you have to see a screening at 10, and you have to eat something, and then you have to see another one at 2, and you might see another one at 7, who knows. But yeah, in general, I will write it as soon as I can.
And you're the kind of writer that it just flows right out of you, or is it a struggle?
I never enjoy it, but I can usually write a first draft pretty fast, and the whole time I'm writing it, I'm kind of going, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is terrible. But the next day I go back to it and go, well, actually, if I move this around and fix this, it'll be okay. And so usually only takes 1 to 2 hours to fix it up to make something that was not very good into something that's usable.
Have you ever made serious enemies with your writing and your criticism? People want to knock you out after they read something that you write about their movie?
I wouldn't say you're likely to take a punch in the face, but Harvey Weinstein did once take out a whole page ad in the New York Times to denounce me because I didn't like his movie Philomena, Steve Coogan movie that he was campaigning for Oscars, and he thought essentially taking out a New York Times ad saying Kyle Smith hates this movie would make everyone else love the movie so much that they would vote for it and give Oscars to it. Not sure it worked out that well. I think it did get an Oscar nomination, though.
You can wear that as a badge of honor now.
Oh, I have the framed New York Times ad. It's like, Kyle Smith denounced this movie, Philomena. See it for yourself.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the movies that people will be interested in talking about heading into the Oscar season. So anything that you saw this year that you think stands out from the crowd?
The thing I really liked was Jay Kelly, which is a movie about a very wealthy, world-famous movie star, played by George Clooney, written and directed by Noah Baumbach, who, of course, wrote some great movies, Kicking and Screaming, Mr. Jealousy, co-wrote Barbie with his wife, Greta Gerwig, wrote some Adam Sandler movies, some Ben Stiller movies. He has tended to stick to a kind of limited core of kind of Brooklyn Jewish neurotics, but I think he's really expanded his vision to make something that's kind of funny, and it's mocking of stardom and Hollywood people, but there's a real heart to it, which is that you can really have everything and have nothing, because this Clooney character is beloved by the world, but not beloved by the only people who matter, who are his daughters. So it's kind of a poignant movie, even though the character is very egotistical and in a way and self-aware. To me, you really feel his plight. The reaction I've gotten from a lot of people is, "Oh, cry me a river. He's got a private jet. He should be happy." But I think being wealthy and being happy are totally different.
Adam Sandler's also in that movie. Do you think that the world is ready to give Adam Sandler an Oscar for a dramatic role?
I don't think he's going to win. I think he'll probably get nominated. I think he's built up a lot of goodwill over the years. He's a more than capable dramatic actor. Is he the greatest dramatic actor in the world? No, but he inhabits this character who's the kind of long-suffering manager very well. And at a certain point, you've been in the business long enough to kind of go, well, this guy has done a lot of good work. Let's recognize him finally.
So Jay Kelly, is there anything else that you particularly liked?
Well, there's 2 Richard Linklater movies that came out almost simultaneously. One's Nouvelle Vague, which is about the French New Wave. It's a very kind of sly look at the making of the movie Breathless, and it's told in black and white, and it focuses on this very pretentious filmmaker, Jean-Luc Godard, who is nevertheless kind of droll and funny. And I think he gets a wonderful performance out of this young actor who's never starred in a movie before, a French actor. And at the same time, Linklater had this completely different movie, although it's also about show business, called Blue Moon, which is about the struggles of the songwriter Larry Hart, who was an alcoholic, He was gay, he was kind of self-hating, and the entire movie takes place in a bar while he's experiencing a kind of anti-triumph in that his longtime partner, Richard Rodgers, has moved on to a new partner, Oscar Hammerstein, and they have put together what would prove to be the biggest musical of all time, Oklahoma, and this is 1943. And Rodgers and Hart, although they had a great deal of success, never had anything as big as Oklahoma. And through Hart, we sort of get two visions of what art is for. And there's a sort of backdoor recognition in the movie that, what we really want is to be grabbed emotionally, which is something that Hammerstein was really good at and Hart was not, even though Hart was a genius and Hammerstein maybe was not.
Apart from the movies, what are your other interests?
Books, TV, music. I think you can tell a lot about people from the culture that they are imbibing. Pop music, I think, is something we haven't really covered that much in the opinion pages, although we review albums and things. I think there's a lot to be, learned from what's popular on the radio right now. What are people watching on TV? A show like The White Lotus, I think, tells us a lot about where we are as a people. In a nutshell, it's that rich people are miserable too, and in a way, it's fun to watch it because it's fun to watch these super wealthy people have even more problems than we have, and there's always, by now it's a running gag, there's always a murder or more than one murder at the end of the season. And it has a satirical edge to it, but I think we've documented in our pages, and there's now real demand for high-end tourists to visit these Four Seasons White Lotus destinations. In fact, you're going to seeing White Lotus branding on these resorts, even though, in a way they're studies in human misery because there's always something horrible happening behind the scenes.
Well, what do you think about the idea of political movies in general? Do they work? Can you think of any that inspired you or that aggravated you?
There's some movies that are just propaganda, and there's other movies that are propaganda and art, and the art is so great that you don't mind the propaganda. I'm thinking of John Ford's The Grapes of Wrath, which is a very sincere and almost touching tribute to collectivism. It's about the Dust Bowl Okies and how they sort of find succor in one of these FDR projects, wherever it was, in communal harmony. I think the message of that movie is completely false, but it's an absolutely brilliant, touching movie. The photography, the Greg Toland photography, is kind of it almost grabs you in your soul. It's just so touching, and the performances by Henry Fonda and others, you just feel the plight of Tom Joad et al. I think Ford is not a very nice person in reality, but he just comes across as the ultimate lovable, ordinary everyman in this movie. And through his eyes, you see, yes, this is the answer. These kind of, there's a commune where they wind up in a sort of paradise, and of course, it culminates in this great "I'll be there" speech where Henry Fonda tells his mother, wherever he knows he's going to die soon, probably, wherever there's a
cop beating a kid,
a kid, or a striker getting locked out of his job. I'll be there. He's explained to his mom, in a way that the soul of socialist man kind of appears in all these kind of prototypical figures of the working class, and it's just an incredibly moving moment in John Ford's career. I think it's probably the best scene John Ford ever shot. But of course, as we know, as Ford grew older, he grew more conservative, so the last laugh was on him, I think.
So last laugh, last question, are you still an Orioles fan?
I hated Peter Angelos so much when he sort of dismantled the team in the late 90s that I kind of stopped following them, but Angelos isn't in charge anymore, so I should get back into them. But they've shown signs of being a great team the last couple of years, and they've just kind of fallen apart. Like, I think they got swept in the playoffs 2 years ago. So I'm not really following them, but I'm prepared to get back on the bandwagon.
Well, they have a lot of young talent, a lot of young players that are supposed to be very good, but they haven't blossomed quite yet. But they just stole a big player from the Mets.
They want to, yeah. Good.
Anyway, Kyle Smith, the film critic of the Wall Street Journal and columnist for Free Expression, the new daily newsletter published by the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.